All right, we are live on YouTube. And we are live on Zoom.
Welcome to everybody who's joining us. Please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Make sure to change your setting to all panelists and attendees. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started today. This is our second webinar of the day, so welcome to some of you who are attending this one if you came to us this morning as well. Welcome to our K-12 Online Teaching Academy today. I am Stephanie Eichley Chang, and I will be co-hosting along with Brian Chungduli, coming to you from the College of Education at San Jose State. We're super excited to welcome Abigail Joseph to present for us today. And she'll be talking to you about computer science in the classroom, a play, then teach approach, which sounds really engaging. Before I hand it over to Abigail, I would like to let you know that she'll be attending the debrief session with us. So if you have questions that you want to dive in deeper with us at the end of the hour, we're going to pop over to that. And I'll go ahead and do the announcements now. Please know that this will be recorded and you will have access to this recording after the event. Your captions are available in the Zoom bar down at the bottom there. Just push the closed caption button. Your video and audio are automatically turned off. So please use the chat or the Q&A to ask questions, and then Abigail will answer some questions along the way. And if you're interested in talking to a larger community of educators, people that have been attending these webinars, please go ahead and find us on Facebook or on LinkedIn, and you can join our groups there. So I will now go ahead and welcome Abigail, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm so excited to be here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And I have a few questions, interactive questions at the beginning. So if you have a device, an extra device, you can join in that conversation by going to joinpd.com, and the join code is LPOKF. I will also post the link to that in the chat, and we'll get started. All right, so a play then teach approach to computer science in the classroom. If you want to connect with me further, you can find me on Twitter at Dr. Abigail Joseph, or via email dr.abigailjoseph@gmail.com. So today our little playlist that we're gonna run through is we're gonna get to know each other a little bit. We're gonna do a little unplugged play, and then I'm gonna talk about programming in Scratch, Python, and Java, the different ways one can do that, and then conclude with some takeaways. So a little bit about me. I think it's really important to always start off by letting you know about my positionality so you can know where my information is coming from. I am from an immigrant family. My parents were both born in Trinidad and Tobago, and I actually was born in Toronto, Canada, but immigrated here to the US as a little one, and grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey, and came out to California for graduate school, where I studied to do my PhD in computer science. So I am a computer scientist. My current role is as an educator, coach, facilitator at the Harker School, where I'm their middle school director of learning, innovation, and design. And I work with our teachers to help them do innovative things in their classroom. I also teach a Java programming elective using processing for our middle school students. I am also towards the end of my Computer Science Teachers Association Equity Fellow. I am one of 10 fellows, teachers from around the country, in their first inaugural year of having a fellowship, of having teachers look at equity and access to CS education. So all of us are doing projects that are centered around that topic. I also have a side project called Etstoria, which is basically my answer or my way of looking at teacher burnout. A few years ago, I burnt out on my 15-year plus teaching career and took what I'm calling my teacher gap year, and thought I was thinking about ways to keep teachers in the classroom. And Storia is all about play and creativity, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And I consider myself to be a storyteller, a futurist. I'm very visionary, an experimenter who loves to innovate, take risk, as well as an artist, designer, creator, and change maker. So with that, I would love to find out who's in the room. So if you would go ahead and respond to the question, and I will share those responses with all of you. And so a good majority of you are current classroom teachers, and some of you working in administration and students at San Jose State. So we have a good mix. That's good for me to know who I am speaking to so I can kind of tailor as I go along. So I'm going to hide responses and move on to the next slide. All right, and so since we are talking about computer science, I would love to know your connections to computer science. And so if you can go ahead and respond to that question. Great. So I can see that most people don't have much background in computer science. Some are learning and some actually do teach. So we'll have a little something for everyone, but that helps me gear my conversation to you all in a better way. So next, I am going to, actually that is all the Pear Decks I have for you. So I'm gonna actually end that right now and just move to Google presentation. Because I think that'll be easier for me to navigate. All right. So we are here. All right, so I'm going to start by sharing something a little bit about myself. So as a kid, I don't know how many of you know about the Atari 2600, but I can just see myself sitting in the basement of my home in New Jersey and playing with Atari games with my older brother, who's 4 years older. And there were a variety of these games. You'd get your cartridge, you'd get your game, and then you'd plug it into the system. But the beauty of that is that there were no instructions. The games might have had some instructions at the beginning, but I didn't look at them. My brother didn't look at them. It was a matter of going in and we just started playing. We just started looking around, trying to figure out how the games worked, what they did, and trying to master those games. And it was that livelihood of having those questions, those unanswered questions, that kept me motivated and more interested in what we were doing. So on the left, there's the Space Invaders game, and on the right, Frogger, and it was just fun to try to figure out what it was that we were trying to do. So a little later in my life, we got a home PC. We didn't have a color monitor. It was actually one of those black and green monitors, but we got this game, this text adventure game called King's Quest. And what I loved about that game is that it was a game where really you had no idea what was going to be in the environment. So the whole idea was you had to walk around the environment and figure out commands, figure out things that you could do to uncover various materials that you could have along your way to be able to complete your adventure. And so there were no instructions, but what made it so intriguing was trying to figure out what the commands were, how to get to different places, and what you could do and collect along the way. And so with that, I am going to talk a little bit about my experience in computer science. So as a kid, and every kid always has this sense of wonder about their environment, about what they're doing, this sense of curiosity of wanting to explore and learn. And the way you explore and learn is through play. I was fortunate enough as a youth in high school to be part of a program that was to expose marginalized audiences to engineering and computer science. And one of those summers, the employees I worked for put this C programming book in front of me, and that's how I developed my interest in computer programming. Well, what was interesting about that is that if you look at this, you're probably all like, this makes no sense. It looks really dry, and it looks complex. I was lucky enough that just for me, I was so intrigued and interested that going through this book was okay. But for most students, they would look at this and probably be like, I don't even know what to do with this. And this is how I learned computer science in high school, in undergraduate, and in grad school. It was this notion of a lot of verbiage, a lot of language that looked foreign and weird, and then this idea of just looking at examples and kind of learning as you go through these examples. Mitchel Resnick, who is a professor at the MIT Media Lab, and his group actually invented Scratch, said, "I believe the best way to help people understand the world is to provide them with opportunities to actively explore, experiment, and express themselves." And he is all about, Mitchel Resnick, about play. He has this wonderful book called Lifelong Kindergarten, which I encourage you all to put in your reading library, Cultivating Creativity Through Projects, Passion, Peers, and Play. And so his whole notion, Scratch, is all about this idea of children constructing their environments and having this environment to play and discover and explore. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you happen to have a piece of paper or a pen handy near you, you can kind of play along. And so I have some instructions here that are going to get you to draw a doodle. And if you don't have anything, you can just imagine. If you're drawing a single straight vertical line, and then from that line, do the following below. You draw 3 shorter lines at an angle at the top, and then draw 3 shorter lines at an angle on the top right. So you have a line, you have 3 angles coming out, and then you're going to just choose one of those lines and repeat that process again. And as you repeat that process, you will find yourself drawing something very similar to this. And you might not have known that this is what the end result was going to be at the end of this. But all you knew was that you were following a set of instructions. And I could come back to you and say, well, those set of instructions are actually something that's called an algorithm. And this algorithm allowed us to draw this tree-like structure. And we could then further talk about more in-depth computer science concepts if it was a higher level audience, and talk about how this links to a concept called recursion. But the whole idea was that you just got a chance to play, explore, and then come up with whatever your questions are, and then solidify the concepts afterwards. So Seymour Papert was a professor and researcher at MIT. Actual Mitchel Resnick was his student. And he said, you can't teach people everything they need to know. The best you can do is position them where they can find what they need to know when they need to know it. And that's what I want to talk about today. This idea of play, empowering students to feel like they can learn anything. And just in case you don't know very much about Seymour Papert, he's a very integral part of the computer science education movement. His book, Mindstorms, talks about his ideas of empowering children to be constructivist, to construct their learning environments, to construct their learning. And he was the inventor of the Logo programming language. So any of the computer science teachers may be aware of turtle programming, or you might have heard the term turtle programming. And that actually all stems from Seymour Papert and his work. And Mindstorms is another great book that talks about play and children discovering and exploring their environments to construct their learning and understanding of what they do. All right, so we're going to get into 3 different sections, and I'm going to talk about learning through concepts and then learning through play. So we're going to start with the Scratch programming language. So concepts first. So often in CS, we teach our students how to learn CS through lessons, tutorials, or projects. Many of you may be familiar with the Hour of Code. It's a great entry point for students to interact and learn about computer science concepts. Often those lessons are very tutorial based or project based. And so often you will get an environment where you will see, in this case, there's an introductory video, and then introducing some key concepts, and you follow along and you find the blocks and you kind of create basically a similar thing as to what the tutorial is creating. And similarly, you might have a lesson that is not step by step, but you might find a lesson where you are shown what blocks to use, how to do those things through a video lesson. So this particular lesson is about loops. And
hey, it's Eric here. Let's go ahead and talk about looping in Scratch. Now, looping is a key concept in computer programming.
Sorry about that. And so in this video, the person talks about how to create loops
in Scratch.
What loops
now,
are.
Is a key concept in computer programming. It allows us to repeat sequences, which makes our life a lot easier when we start building out more complex projects.
So the whole notion here is that as the person is doing the tutorial, they're speaking, they're telling you what a loop is, how you use it, how to construct one. And in my next example, there are these scratch card resources that are available. Again, you have a concept idea, and then it will provide you the code, the blocks to utilize to do that idea, and then maybe you try something else. So this whole idea of learning through seeing and modeling is great. And often that is like the first step to just becoming familiar with computer coding and programming. But there are other ways that you can introduce coding to students. And this is what I want to talk about and emphasize is the play first model. So this idea of creating a sandbox for exploration. And so what would that look like? So this is a project that I created for a third grade classroom. And I worked at a school where actually project-based learning and hands-on experiential-based learning was what they did. So I was forced to break my mold of the teach first, learn by example, which I just talked about, and think about how to create a way for the students to actually experiment and play and discover. And so this example is the challenge is for them to use some blocks to explore and create different patterns using Scratch. And what I provided them were a bunch of blocks, and I did provide, because often in a computer science classroom, you have a large spectrum of students, and some may have some prior knowledge and some may not. So for those students that they look at this and they're totally don't want to dive in, providing them a hint for play is also good. So the hint doesn't actually tell them, it shows them some constructs, but it still doesn't tell them what these blocks mean. And so the idea of having the students play and discover was part of that lesson. And for those that were on the higher spectrum of the learning, I've created a part 2 so that if they had some prior knowledge of Scratch and had done some stuff before, that they would be challenged by discovering new blocks and playing with new blocks they might not be aware of. And I can't, oh, well, I was just gonna say, that I can get the windows up to see what the questions are. Yes, I will be providing at the end of the presentation, I'm going to provide a bit.ly for where you can get all the slides. So sorry, I meant to say that earlier. So you do not have to take vigorous notes. All the slides I will give to you at the end. So a resource in this idea of play The Creative Computing Lab at the Harvard Graduate School of Education provides a large creative computing curriculum. And a lot of their curriculum is actually very much based in play. So you can see this example on the side that is the same thing that I did, created in my classroom, that I didn't even know about this creative computing curriculum before I did that in my classroom. This would have been great, is that the idea of providing students with blocks, having them experiment and create, and then afterwards reflecting on their learning. So the way you would follow up after they've done this play and created things is, hey, what does a repeat block do? What does that do? And then you can emphasize to them what that concept is afterwards, the idea of a loop and how that's important to what they're doing. So I will pause there to see if there are any other questions at this time.
Yeah, you know, I'm not seeing any pop up yet, but I'm sure some will come as you keep speaking. Thank you.
All right. So moving on to CS programming with Python. So Scratch is, as you saw, is a blocks-based language. So that just means, I'm gonna just go back, that the programming language is visual. So the students have these blocks that they link together to create a program. Python is a text-based programming language, and with that brings a level of complexity, because not only do you have to know what the concepts are, but you also have to type correctly to make things work the way you want to work, right? So again, we're going to talk about concepts first. So Python lessons and tutorials. How might one go about learning Python? You can go in a book, and a book is pretty much very similar to something that you would find online in terms of lessons and tutorials. And so if you take a look at this video, I realized that I said I wasn't going to have sound, but I do have some sound. So I am going to just step out of my screen share for a moment and share it back again with the sound, computer sound on, so that you all can hear it better. All right. So, oops, going back, play this one.
Hi, in this video, we're going to meet Tracy the turtle and learn to use some basic commands to get her moving around our canvas. Let's get started. So who is this Tracy character? Tracy is a turtle that will follow our commands if we tell them to her in the language she understands. In order to communicate with Tracy, we need to speak to her in a language called Python. Throughout this experience, we'll learn how to write some computer programs in this language. Tracy lives in a grid world, where an X and Y axis determine where we can move her. Goes from negative 200. The first command we're going to learn is the forward command. In order for Tracy to understand this command, we need to write the word forward in all lowercase letters, and then next to it, we need to make sure that we are always draw a line when she moves. So you do not need to use the pen down command when you first move her if you want her to leave a trail. Let's go ahead and use these commands to write some Tracy programs in our code editor. This is our code editor. You're going to be using it to write all of your programs, so let me give you a quick tour. On the left side...
Hey, Abigail.
Yes.
For your video player, the volume was pretty loud on that. I'm wondering if you can turn that the volume down going forward, and also if you could just repeat what you were saying as the video was playing, because it was difficult to make out what you were saying.
Thank you. It's very funny because I did not hear the video on my side. So thank you for that. I will go back And I will turn the sound down.
In this video, we're going to meet Tracy the turtle and learn to use some.
So what I was explaining as that went forward was that as the tutorial went along, it was sharing concepts. So telling you what the commands are of the language, how they work, how you piece them together, and then showing how to create a program as you do that. And another similar vein is going through a website tutorial. This one shouldn't have sound. So I just went to this website and did a little screen capture, but you have all your basic concepts. You choose where you start at the beginning, you go to a concept. Let's say we want to learn about loops. It's going to show you an example of what a loop looks like. It's going to tell you how that thing functions. And then it gives you the opportunity to try those loop concepts and maybe change and alter them for yourself. And this is a similar site. It's a beginner's guide to Python Turtle. And this is just a screencast that I did. So there's no sound, but again, you have all of your concepts. You go in and it tells you what the concepts are, how to get through them, how to implement them, and shows you an example of how it works. And that's great. And as I said, none of these approaches are wrong. They're very valid and a great way to learn. As I said at the beginning, this is primarily how I learned to be a computer scientist, and programming and coding was through books and tutorials and things like this. However, not every student is going to learn in that manner. And so we definitely want to think about how to create opportunities for students to not just follow a set of rules and concepts. So again, this is just another screencast of another example from an hour of code where you enter this world and now they are sharing with you what the commands are, how they work. Let me see. Yeah, you can see it better. So there are these commands that are simplified Python commands, and you go through, actually I had a little bit of a hard time figuring out what it was I was supposed to do. So video will kind of explain what you're trying to do. And then later on, I'm gonna forward a little bit to when I figured out how it worked after I closed the video, is that the play button is actually on the bottom, I discovered. And that goes through each command, and then the little robot does its thing as it goes through each command. So again, you have the commands, it's showing how it works, and exiting. All right. It shows you how it works. And I'm trying to get back to full screen. It's always fun. Go back this way. All right. So again, this idea of concepts, then kind of play and learning. But there's another way that one can approach learning a text-based language like Python. And this model I got from Dr. Emily Tomford. You can find her at the Green. She is a computer scientist herself who does a lot of computer science education. And I experienced this in a workshop she did with some high school students. And I thought this was such a novel approach to introducing someone to a language, a computer language that they don't know. And so this idea of empowering yourself to learn the language comes through in this example, the idea of using existing examples and references to learn and construct your meaning of what you are embarking on. So in this instance, we're using an online programming environment called Replit. And again, using the turtle, this idea of the turtle graphics. But the students don't know, have never experienced Python. They don't know how it works, what it does. And the first thing she has them do is do a Google search for Python turtle Replit. So then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I can learn a language just by using Google. What that does is it takes you to this Replit site for Python turtle. And the first thing you see is this question of not sure what to do, run some examples. So you click on the examples link and it pops up this hello first introductory example. So the students click on that example and then you say, what does the program do? I don't tell them what anything means. I have them run it and then figure out what does the program do. And if you're familiar with Python or any kind of coding, you can probably guess what this is going to draw. In this case, it is going to draw a square with a red, green, yellow, and blue line. So once they've run it and they see what it creates, the next question is, well, in order for them to, if they see what it does, then they start to construct meaning behind what is going on in the code in this area, right? And so they start to see, well, okay, this part is obviously telling it what color to do. This part is moving the turtle along, and this part is telling the turtle to turn left. Again, no one has told them what those things do or mean, but they are able to construct that understanding based on the output of the program. And so from there, you can have them construct meaning even more by saying, okay, well, we know this program creates a square. How can we have the program turn it into a triangle? So now they're going to have to construct meaning and really understand what is going on here and what is going on here to be able to say, ah, I've got 4 sides here. Well, if I want to do a triangle, I'm only going to have 3 sides. So they're going to probably decide to take away 1 color. And then, well, I know that a square has angles that are 90 degrees. So I'm going to know I'm going to have to change this to create my triangle. And it'll be interesting because of the way that the turtle works. Sometimes students will start with 60 because that makes logical sense in terms of the angles of a triangle. But in reality, with the way the program works, it's 120 that creates that triangle. But that's the whole idea, is that they are doing a trial and error. They are learning from their mistakes. And with that mistake, they are actually developing a better understanding of the concepts versus me telling them, this is what this does, this is how it works. And I kind of relate it to the idea of when you're driving and you don't know where you're going and you think you have an idea and you go that way, but then all of a sudden you make a wrong turn and you're not where you're supposed to be. The next time you go driving, you are not going to make that mistake because you know that what that thing did not take you in the right direction. And so this idea of introducing play into the classroom is very similar in nature. And as you go on, we can say, okay, now let's do a search for the reference. And so you have them do a Google search for the Python turtle reference. And then all of a sudden they have all these commands at will. And you can pose some more questions. So how do you get the turtle to fill a shape? Then they look through the reference. They figure out, well, this is what I want to do. They figure out how to use a reference. They look in until they find the command that has to do with filling a shape. And then they figure out how to utilize that in their program. And so this whole idea of empowering the learner to say, hey, I can learn how to do something if I have an idea of how to do it. I just have to build that tenacity, that habit of being able to go out and look at a reference guide or be able to do the correct words in a Google search to find the information that I want. And so then you can build on that and say, all right, well, now you have this wonderful reference library, make something interesting. And that's so open-ended that, the beginning learner might just make another shape like an octagon or a trapezoid. But the more advanced person who really is grasping the concepts will go off and maybe make some really unique patterns like the one that's on the reference page, like this one right here. And so this whole expansion of the sandbox and playground just got really big and has space for the beginning user and the person who really understands and the concepts, and they can challenge themselves further by looking at commands that they don't know anything about and figuring out how those work and how to integrate that into their program. So I'm at a good pausing point. If there are any questions thus far.
I think your pace has been really nice and we're able to follow, so you can keep going.
All right, wonderful. So now I'm going to take it up a level. This is for more high school oriented teachers in terms of the programming language. So I'm going to talk about CS programming with Java. And this is more equivalent to, I guess, my learnings as an undergraduate and a graduate student. So Java is another text-based programming language. It's often more complex. People use Python as a starter text-based language because it doesn't have a lot of syntax. And syntax is just all of the semicolons and curly braces, all of those notions of the language that are needed. And so Java tends to be a more advanced language that is taught now in high school and in college. And what's interesting about the Java programming language and other languages like it that are a little bit more advanced and nuanced is that often the only way to learn it is through lessons and tutorials. And so these lessons, again, you'll see a pattern of...
Hi, in this video, we're going to talk about variables. So what's a variable? A variable is like a box with a name that can hold a value. So here, I have a variable called numapples with the value 5 that represents these 5 apples here. So remember, variables have a name, a type, and a value. There's 5 apples.
this is how it works.
So there's a few important things we can do with variables, and one of them is declaring a variable. So this code here, int numapples, semicolon, declares the variable numapples. And what that really means is that you're saying, I hereby make a box called numapples to hold an integer. So it's important that in Java, you say the type of the variable when you declare it.
Just stop it. You all can go back and look at it if you want to look at it any further. But this is, again, another hour of code having to do with learning the concept of Java. And so after you've done a video tutorial, then it throws you into this playground. And for most of you, you'll look at this and be like, wow, that is super complex, and I wouldn't even know where to begin. And it is super complex. And that is, I think, part of the problem with an entry point into computer science, is that often it's looked at to be super complex, and we don't have the, it's not introduced in a way that someone who might have an interest can have it be accessible to them. So another way that a person might learn Java is to go to an online tutorial site like Codecademy, which actually has lessons, interactive lessons for learning a variety of programming languages. And when you, one more time, there we go. When you are in something like Codecademy, it runs just much like a textbook. It will introduce concepts. It will give you some instructions, and then you have to follow the instructions, and it moves you to the next step. And so in this example, I've run the first instruction. Now I'm in the next lesson. I'm a fast reader, if you can't tell. I skipped down to the instructions, and I'm looking at them, and I'm thinking, okay, I don't even know what to write, because the line of code that I need to write is actually might be above in the text or below, but there is this notion of a hint. So I'm reading, that's what I'm supposed to do, but I don't know what the command is to print. And so I eventually scroll down and I say, I need a hint. So I get a hint, it tells me what to write. So I type out that particular line of code. And what I do is I end up typing it just how it is in the hint, which goes to show that these tutorials can be very robotic. Like I'm looking at the hint and I'm all like, oh, I'm going to do that. And then I run it and then I realize that that's not what they asked me to do. And so I eventually scroll back up to see, oh, they wanted me to say hello to someone. And instead of saying like, hello, Abigail, I go, hello, someone. But that's enough to allow me to move to the next stage of this tutorial. So I typed it just like that. And then I run it. And it takes me to the next step. But that again speaks to how this can become a very robotic, methodical process. And I am going to go back in here and represent. That learning a complex programming language like Java can become very methodical, very much. I will do as the model does, and then I will adjust a few things, but then the student doesn't really understand the underlying concepts of what they are doing. And so during my course as an educator, I became familiar with a model called POGLE. It's an inquiry model for exploring computer science. So there is in Utah at Westminster College, a person that I went to college undergraduate with. She works in the computer science program there, and they have worked on creating POGLE models for computer science. So process-oriented guided inquiry learning. And this process actually comes from, POGLE is based on the biology of learning, and that has been in development for over 15 years, primarily in chemistry education. And it's this idea of learning concepts through inquiry, and with teamwork and collaboration, which is a big part of computer science. So you have teams of learners who work on some scripted inquiry activities and investigations, helping them to construct their own knowledge. So again, back to the Seymour Papert idea of constructivism and students being able to construct their knowledge of what they're learning versus just following along and hoping for the best. So the POGLE process itself, teams follow a set of processes. There's a protocol to it. So the first couple of times you do it, you have to set up the whole protocol environment, but then the students really become familiar with the whole process and are able to do these inquiry activities at a quicker rate. And so the activities are focused on specific learning objectives. And what is great about this process is instead of the teacher being the lecturer or the one with all the knowledge and sharing what the concepts are, the instructor is more of a facilitator, and the students are taking charge of their learning process. So every inquiry that the students do, they have group roles. There's a facilitator, there's a spokesperson, there's quality control, and there's a process analyst. And so not only are the students constructing their own knowledge through play, but they're also learning a great set of collaboration skills. So an example activity would be around operators and division. And so the content learning objectives for this specific activity is to be able to evaluate a Java expression that uses the division operator with integers, and then explain the difference between an integer and floating point division. So really understanding how this idea of division works within the Java programming language. And then there's process learning objectives. And so in this being an introductory, the first activity of the POGLE CS, it also explains the responsibilities of the POGLE roles. So the students will also understand the roles and then provide feedback on to their group members of how they completed their roles and how they did as a group together. So what this looks like is you have these worksheets, and as you can see over here, the goals of the class are specific. Most of the models are meant to be in a 45-minute class. They're set up with questions that they have to think about beforehand. So this idea of exploring and learning and thinking about what they think, what they know before they dive into the activity. The next pages, in this particular one, it's talking also about the roles. So there are questions specifically about what the roles of the group are. But then as the model goes on, you'll see that there's talking about the division operator. And it presents a model for the students to critically think about and inquire about. So here at number 6, it says, in the above model, which numbers divided by 4 evaluate to 3 in Java. And so they have to go through and figure out which ones are evaluating to the number 3, which they would see here. And then it asks them, how do the above answers differ from the arithmetically correct answer? And the inquiry further goes on to create another model for them to think about, answers that they have to generate, questions that they have to ask, that get them down here, gets into the nuance of what does it mean to divide by 2 floating point numbers versus a floating point divided by a whole integer number, and what does that evaluate to, and then answering a bunch of questions. And then at the end, they reflect on how they did as a group. So there are parts where they're individually answering questions for themselves and then talking about the inquiry process with each other. And then also doing an individual assignment. And so those POGIL activities, you can actually, the link's in here, but you can go to that site and sign up to have access to all of them. They're all Creative Commons, so they're all available for anyone to use, adapt, and use in their classroom. So to wrap this up, I'm going to end with another Seymour Papert quote. I am convinced that the best learning takes place when the learner takes charge. Seymour Papert. So this idea of play, then teach is the whole underlying notion is to allow students to construct their own meaning, make mistakes, and formulate questions. Because the more that they have invested in the process of what they're learning, the more they're going to understand and the more they're going to like it and have interest in it. And these mixed approaches, whether it be the teach first, learn by tutorial, which is again, one way to go about doing it, and it's not incorrect. But this idea of play and constructing your knowledge as you play and tinker and make mistakes is another approach. But altogether, these mixed approaches of teaching will open doors for more students. So we're not just saying this is the one method that's going to work for every student, but now we've kind of opened, if we mix and match these methodologies, we have opened the doors for more students to construct and hopefully learn to love computer science and computer programming. And last thing I want to point out is this book, Computer Science in K-12, an A to Z handbook on teaching programming, just came out this month, edited by Sushi Grover, a Stanford graduate student. And it is a wonderful book filled with examples and ways to be a better computer science teacher. So for those of you that are already teaching computer science, and even if you're thinking about teaching computer science, this is the one book that really talks about the pedagogy of teaching computer science, just versus how do you walk through a lesson of teaching loops or conditionals or any other type of concept. So this is a great book, that resource that would be another great addition to the idea of introducing play in the computer science classroom. So with that, I will end. You can find the slides here at this bit.ly, and feel free to contact me with any questions that you may have by email, or follow me on Twitter at Dr. Abigail Joseph, and at Edsoria if you yourself want to become more playful teacher in your classroom. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I wanted to invite anybody that would like to attend our debrief session with Abigail to follow the link that Brian has put into the chat that was also emailed out to you. And then we can all meet there in an informal environment and you can discuss some more with Abigail. So thank you everybody who's attended, and we'll see you there hopefully. Thanks, Abigail.
Thank you. See you there. Bye-bye.
Bye.